Picture this. You're sitting at your kitchen table, laptop open, and you're looking at a confirmation screen. Payment received. Balance, $0.00. You've been imagining this moment for 2 years, maybe 3. You thought there would be something. Confetti, a rush, some cinematic swell of music that tells you your life just changed. Instead, there's just the hum of the refrigerator and the blue glow of a screen showing you a number you've never seen next to your name before. 0. And for a second, you don't know how to feel. That's the part nobody warns you about. The strange, disorienting quiet right after the last payment clears. You've been carrying this thing for so long that its absence feels almost wrong. Like taking off a backpack you forgot you were wearing. But here's what I want you to understand. That quiet isn't an anticlimax. That quiet is the sound of something enormous shifting underneath your feet. Most people think paying off debt is about the money, about the number going to 0, about finally being free from the monthly payment that's been bleeding your budget for years. And sure, that's part of it. But that's actually the smallest part of what just happened. Because debt doesn't just cost you money. It costs you something far more valuable. And most people don't realize how much they were paying until the bill finally stops coming. My name is Jack, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why crossing certain financial finish lines changes people in ways they never expected. If you're someone who's currently grinding through debt payoff, or you've recently crossed that line and you're trying to make sense of what comes next, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up helping you see the other side more clearly. Now, before we get into what actually changes when you pay off debt, let me ask you something. When you picture your life without a debt payment, what do you imagine? More money in your account at the end of the month? Less stress? A general sense that things will feel easier? Those things are real, but they're surface level. The transformation that actually happens goes much deeper than any of that, and some of it will genuinely surprise you. Let's start with something that nobody in personal finance talks about honestly. Debt is a cognitive tax, and it's one you've been paying every single day, whether you realized it or not. Here's what I mean. When you carry debt, it doesn't just sit quietly in your bank account waiting for its monthly payment. It lives in your head. It runs in the background of almost every financial decision you make, like software you never chose to install that's quietly draining your battery around the clock. You're at dinner with friends, and someone suggests a weekend trip. Before you can even process whether you want to go, there's a calculation happening. Can I afford this with the minimum payment due on the 15th? You get an email about a certification program that could boost your salary. Before you can get excited, the math starts. I can't take on another monthly obligation right now. Your car makes a noise it didn't make last week. Instead of annoyance, you feel something closer to dread. This is the cognitive tax. The constant low-level financial anxiety that debt produces isn't just unpleasant, it's functionally expensive. Researchers at Princeton found that financial worry consumes cognitive bandwidth in the same way that a difficult task does. When your brain is partially allocated to managing debt stress, you have less mental capacity available for everything else. Problem solving, creativity, long-term thinking, the ability to notice opportunities. All of it gets a little slower, a little cloudier, a little harder to access. And the brutal part is that you adapt to it. After enough time, you stop noticing the weight because it just becomes your normal. You forget what it felt like to make a financial decision without that background hum of obligation running underneath it. That's what disappeared when that balance hit 0. Not just the payment, the tax. And once it's gone, the difference in how your brain operates is something most people describe as almost physical. Like a noise you got so used to that you stopped hearing it, and then one day it just stops. And the silence is almost startling. But the cognitive shift is just the beginning, because here's where things start getting genuinely interesting. When you're carrying debt, it doesn't just affect how you think, It affects who you are at work. And this is something most people never connect until they're standing on the other side of it, looking back.
Think about the last time your company announced layoffs or restructuring. If you're carrying significant debt, that kind of news doesn't just make you nervous. It makes you desperate. Not outwardly, not in a way anyone would necessarily notice, but internally, you're running calculations. How long could I survive without a paycheck? How far behind would I fall on payments? What would I have to cut first? And that desperation, even when it's quiet and internal, changes how you show up. You don't push back on the project you think is a mistake because you need this job more than you need to be right. You don't ask for the raise you've earned because the timing feels too risky and you can't afford to create friction. You accept conditions you know aren't fair because the alternative of walking away isn't actually available to you. Debt doesn't just drain your bank account, it drains your leverage. And leverage, it turns out, is worth an enormous amount of money over the course of a career.
When that debt is gone, something shifts in how you carry yourself professionally. It's not arrogance, it's not recklessness. It's just the quiet confidence of someone who knows they could survive a gap. Someone who's negotiating from a position of choice rather than necessity. And that shift, that single change in your internal posture, has a way of producing external results. Better assignments, more recognition, the raise you stopped asking for. Because people respond to confidence in ways that are hard to quantify, but impossible to ignore. And then there's the identity piece, which is the part most financial content completely skips over because it's harder to put in a spreadsheet. For however long you've been carrying debt, some part of your financial identity has been organized around it. You are someone who owes money. That's not a moral judgment. It's just a factual state that quietly shapes how you see yourself and what you believe you're capable of. When the balance hits zero, that identity has to reorganize. And for most people, it reorganizes around something new. You stop being someone who manages debt and start being someone who builds wealth. That sounds like a small semantic shift. It isn't, because your behavior follows your identity. When you see yourself as someone who builds wealth, you start making decisions that a wealth builder makes. You notice things you didn't notice before. You ask different questions. You start thinking in decades instead of just surviving the month. Now let's talk about the math, because the psychological shift is real and it matters enormously. But the financial acceleration that happens after debt payoff is something most people dramatically underestimate. And I want to show you exactly what we're talking about here. Let's say you've been paying $800 a month toward debt. Could be a car loan, a stack of credit cards, a personal loan, some combination. $800 a month. That's not an unusual number. That's actually pretty conservative for someone carrying a meaningful debt load in 2026. You've been sending that $800 out the door every single month, and at least some portion of it, depending on your interest rate, has been going straight to interest. Not to your balance, not to your future, just to the cost of having borrowed the money in the first place. If you were carrying $15,000 in credit card debt at the average interest rate of around 21%, you were paying roughly $260 a month in interest alone before a single dollar touched your principal. Over the course of a year, that's over $3,000 that evaporated. Money you earned, money you paid taxes on, money that built absolutely nothing for you. Gone. That's what I mean by the debt dividend. When the debt is paid off, that $800 a month doesn't disappear. It's still there. It's just no longer spoken for. And what you do with it in the first 6 months after payoff will have more impact on your financial future than almost any other decision you make. Because here's what $800 a month actually becomes when it's redirected toward building instead of paying. At an 8% average annual return, which is a reasonable long-term expectation for a diversified index fund portfolio, $800 a month invested consistently grows to roughly $58,000 in 5 years. In 10 years, you're looking at about $146,000. In 20 years, That $800 a month that used to fund someone else's profit is now sitting at approximately $471,000, nearly $500,000 from one redirected payment.
And that's before you factor in the interest you're no longer paying, because every dollar you were losing to interest is now a dollar that either stays in your account or goes to work in your investments. The debt dividend isn't just the freed up cash flow, it's the compounding effect of that cash flow over time, combined with the compounding effect of no longer losing money to interest every single month.
The gap between the version of you that keeps carrying debt and the version of you that paid it off isn't linear. It doesn't just grow steadily. It accelerates. 10 years from now, the difference in net worth between those two versions of the same person, same income, same job, same life, could easily be $200,000 or more. Not because one person got lucky or found some secret investment strategy, just because one person stopped sending $800 a month to a creditor and started sending it to their own future. There's also something that happens to your relationship with risk once the debt is gone, and this is one of the most underrated changes of all. When you're carrying debt, your relationship with financial risk is fundamentally distorted. You can't take the risks that build wealth because you can't afford the downside. Starting a side business costs money up front. Investing aggressively requires tolerating short-term losses. Leaving a bad job to find a better one requires the ability to survive a gap. All of these moves are harder, sometimes impossible, when you're already stretched thin by monthly obligations.
Debt-free, your risk tolerance changes. Not because you become reckless, but because you can actually calculate risk honestly for the first time. That side business idea that you've been sitting on for 2 years because the startup costs felt impossible, now you can actually look at the numbers and decide based on the opportunity, not based on desperation. That investment account you wanted to fund more aggressively but couldn't justify while you were bleeding interest every month, now every dollar you put in is working for you instead of partially subsidizing a creditor. The financially dangerous moment that follows is something almost nobody talks about, and I want to make sure you hear this clearly, because missing it is how people end up right back where they started within 18 months. After you pay off your debt, there is a window. A narrow, critical window where your financial habits are still calibrated to scarcity and your income is suddenly, for the first time in years, completely available to you. And in that window, the single most dangerous financial reflex a person can have kicks in: the urge to reward yourself. You earned this. You sacrificed. You delayed gratification for months or years. You said no to things. And now that the payment is gone, there is a very loud, very convincing voice that says you deserve to fill that space with something nice. A newer car, since the old one is paid off now anyway. A vacation you've been putting off. An upgrade on something you've been tolerating. Maybe just a general loosening of the restrictions that felt so necessary when you were grinding through repayment. And here's the thing. You do deserve those things. That's not the problem. The problem is timing and proportion. Because the moment most people get their first taste of a debt-free paycheck, the habits that built the discipline that got them there are at their most fragile. The budget felt necessary when the debt was there to justify it. With the debt gone, the justification disappears. And without a clear plan for where that freed cash flow is going, lifestyle inflation moves in automatically, quietly and fast. I've seen this play out more times than I can count. Someone pays off $20,000 in credit card debt over 2 years of grinding sacrifice. They feel incredible for about 30 days. Then they buy a car they don't need because the monthly payment feels manageable now that the cards are clear. 18 months later, they have a car payment that's almost exactly what the credit card minimum used to be. The number in their account looks similar to where they were before. And the psychological freedom they worked 2 years to earn is gone. Not because they're irresponsible, because nobody told them that the moment right after debt payoff is when the game actually starts, not when it ends. The debt payoff is not the finish line, it's the starting line.
And what you do in the first 90 days after that balance hits zero will determine whether the next chapter of your financial life looks completely different from the last one, or whether it just reruns the same patterns with different labels on the debt.
The practical move is almost insultingly simple. Before the first debt-free paycheck clears, decide where that freed cash flow is going. Not generally, specifically. Not I'll invest more, but on the 1st of next month, $800 moves automatically to my brokerage account. Make the decision before the money is in your hands, because once it's there, the competing voices get much louder and much harder to ignore.
Here's what that actually looks like in real numbers. If you take that freed $800 and you split it, $500 to long-term investments, $200 to a dedicated emergency fund top-up or sinking fund for actual near-term goals, and $100 to genuine discretionary spending that you don't track or feel guilty about, you've done something remarkable. You've preserved the financial discipline that got you here while also giving yourself a legitimate, intentional reward that doesn't compromise the foundation. That $100 isn't a failure of willpower. It's what makes the other $700 sustainable long-term.
Back to that kitchen table, the confirmation screen. Balance, $0.0. The refrigerator hum and the blue light and the strange quiet. Now you know what that quiet actually is. It's not an anticlimax. It's the sound of the cognitive tax lifting. The sound of your brain getting bandwidth back. The sound of a lever that's been working against you for years finally switching direction. The debt didn't just cost you money. It cost you mental space, professional leverage, risk tolerance, and time. And now you have all of it back. What you do next is what determines everything. The game didn't end when that balance hit zero. It just finally became fair. And for the first time in a long time, every move is yours to make.